Good afternoon. Good morning to those of you joining us from the Americas, and welcome to the Bibliographical Society's virtual winter visit for 2026. My name is Nicholas Bell, and I'm currently serving as President of the Bibliographical Society, and it's a pleasure to be joining you from Trinity College in Cambridge. The Bibliographical Society has organised visits to libraries for its members for many years, but it took the COVID pandemic to encourage us to move online. Since then, we've been on virtual tours of libraries in Japan, Australia, the United States, Mexico, and last year we made a memorable visit to the library of St. Catherine's Monastery, Mount Sinai, at the kind invitation of its librarian, Father Justin Sanaitis. This year, it is a very special privilege for us to be invited behind the scenes of one of the great libraries of the world, and one which can trace its origins back almost as far as Mount Sinai. It was with some trepidation that we made inquiries last year whether we might be granted permission to undertake this visit to the Apostolic Library in the Vatican. But the response could not have been warmer. I would like to express my particular thanks to the Prefect of the Vatican Library, Don Mauro Mantovani, SDB, and to the Secretary of the Library, Dr. Raffaella Vincenti, for replying so positively and for assisting in the preparation of this event. We also express our thanks to His Excellency Archbishop Giovanni Cesare Pagazzi, Librarian and Archivist of the Holy Roman Church, under whose auspices we are able to invite you on this tour. This afternoon's event will proceed as follows. First, we will be shown a brief film about the history of the Apostolic Library. Then Dr. Stephen Metzger, Assistente in the Department of Manuscripts, will present a talk about specific aspects of the collections. After this, there will be an opportunity to pose questions arising from the two presentations to Dr. Metzger. The whole event will last a little over an hour. Afterwards, the Prefect of the Library has kindly given us permission to post the recording of this event on YouTube for the benefit of those not able to join us live. But I should reassure you that details of participants will not be included in this version, and the question and answer session will also not be included. We have a very large audience joining us on Zoom this afternoon, and for that reason, we will not be able to open the floor to direct questions from the audience. Instead, we invite you to enter questions using the chat function. Please feel free to type questions during the presentations, and I will hope to group them in particular fields when we reach the discussion section. During the presentations, I would be grateful if participants would remain muted and keep their cameras turned off. So, without further ado, I now invite you to watch the introductory film, after which we will proceed directly to Dr. Stephen Metzger's presentation.
Over 5 centuries ago, in the heart of Vatican City, the Vatican Apostolic Library was born. In the Pope's library, books, documents, and objects of inestimable value are collected, preserved, and made available to scholars. Established according to the intention of Pope Nicholas V in the mid-15th century, today, after more than 5 centuries, it houses a collection of precious, unique works from numerous fields of human knowledge. Browsing through an ancient volume, whether it is a manuscript, an incubulum, or a printed book, is always exciting, and the library shares this with its readers, regardless of their origin, religion, or culture. The Vatican Apostolic Library has a great responsibility on behalf of all humanity. Since its foundation, it has committed itself in every way to be always up to its mission, to collect, preserve and transmit the heritage entrusted to it. Treasures must be protected and carefully cared for. In the Conservation Laboratory, one of the oldest within a library, attentive eyes and steady hands patiently take care of the heritage, protecting it, filling gaps, and restoring the brilliance of colours. In addition to protecting the works from physical, chemical, or biological damage, it is necessary to care for them to ensure their transmission to the future. But an ancient book can sometimes hide unexpected riches. The techniques and tools related to image study allow the photographic laboratory to bring to light texts that were previously unknown. Today, the digitization process has made millions of pages available online for free. The consultation of the digital library is open to everyone. Tens of thousands of manuscripts can be studied remotely, and research is made available in a continuous exchange among scholars. The Printed Books Department also hosts the Graphics Cabinet, which collects artistic engravings, drawings, copperplate moulds, photographic cards. Great works and prints made by some of the most famous artists in the history of Italian and foreign art. The Vatican Medaglieria is one of the most important in the world. It preserves coins and medals from every era: Chinese, Persian, Greek, Roman, Punic. Coins and medals represent another way of reading history and understanding humanity. The Vatican School of Library Science, founded by Pius XI, the Liberian Pope, has been training professionals dedicated to the care, preservation and enhancement of documentary heritage since 1934. After more than 5 centuries of history, the Vatican Apostolic Library is more present than ever and open to sharing its wealth in new forms. Literature, history, art, antiquity, law, the history of astronomy, mathematics and medicine, theology and philosophy. Vatican Apostolic Library is a heritage of humanity that allows the Church to dialogue with everyone.
The Bishop of Rome has long had need of books for liturgical celebrations, for the sacred scriptures, for the decrees of councils that form the basis of the law that governs the Church. The early popes most likely also had books of theology, philosophy, literature, and history, depending on personal interest. Unfortunately, what their collections were like, and where they were kept, is difficult to ascertain with precision. Archaeological evidence suggests that the popes maintained a library in the complex of buildings surrounding the Basilica of St. John Lateran, Rome's cathedral. It is nearly impossible to identify which books may survive from this early period, but we do have a few indications. The fragments you see on the right are a small part of a 4th or 5th century copy of Livy's Histories. The parchment was cut to provide wrappings for Christian relics, bits of dirt that had been collected from holy sites in Jerusalem. The inscriptions in the margins, written in Greek, indicate from where the dirt was taken. Pope Leo III, 795 to 816, had these relics placed in a cypress box and inserted into the main altar of the Holy of Holies, that is, the Pope's chapel in the Scala Sancta, or Holy Stairs, one of Rome's most important shrines. If the popes followed the custom of aristocratic Roman families, then the papal collection of books was most likely accessible to people outside his circle and curia. But like many medieval monarchs, the papal court was itinerant. Thus, the Pope's library and archive followed him from place to place. In 1309, Pope Clement V moved the papacy to Avignon in the south of France. There, the popes amassed an impressive collection of books. At the end of those turbulent days, when there were popes and anti-popes, the library was dispersed, and very few volumes from this massive collection returned to Rome. A significant part of the collection was taken by Benedict XIII, Pedro de Luna, to his palace in Spain. Some books eventually came into the possession of the Roman Borghese family in the 17th century. In 1891, Pope Leo XIII acquired this collection for the Vatican Library. The manuscript to the right, containing a number of theological treatises, was owned and partly copied by Pierre Roget, who became Pope Clement VI, 1342 to 1352. The story of the Vatican Library as we know it today begins with Pope Nicholas V. Tommaso Parontuccelli from Zarzana was a humanist, with a particular interest in the writings of the Greek Church Fathers. By humanism, we mean the intellectual movement known as the Studia Humanitatis, those literary, historical, and moral studies which developed from a renewed interest in ancient Greek, and especially Latin, writings and civilization. A staunch proponent of this new mode of study, Nicholas aided Cosimo de' Medici with the establishment of the first public humanist library in Florence, at San Marco, the nucleus of the Biblioteca Lorenziana. As Pope, he desired that the papacy should have a library to support these kinds of studies. As he says in a letter dated 30 April 1451, his creation is pro communi doctorum virorum commodo, that is, for the common convenience of the learned. In other words, the library would have a distinctly public character. Although it is often referred to as the Library of the Popes, the Vatican Library should not be understood as the Pope's private library, but a library sponsored by the papacy for the use of all. The arrows point to the windows of Pope Nicholas's library on the first floor of the Apostolic Palace. An important activity of the humanists was copying and editing Latin classics, which continued, indeed accelerated, as the means of book production moved from manuscripts to print. In addition, humanists sought to translate almost the entire body of then-known Greek literature into Latin, and thus into the mainstream of Western thought. We have an example of this activity in this slide. This is manuscript copy of Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War, translated into Latin by Lorenzo Valla. In the illumination, Valla, at left, is offering a book, perhaps his translation. Above him, in the center of the upper margin, Pope Nicholas V also holds a book, perhaps the very translation, and his hand is raised in blessing. The next major step in the history of the Vatican Library occurred during the papacy of Sixtus IV. On 15 June 1475, he issued the Apostolic Letter Ad Decora Militantes Ecclesiae, in which he provided for the administration and organization of the Vatican Library. He appointed as librarian Bartolomeo Sacchi, called Platina from his place of origin. Here we see the famous fresco by Malozzo da Forlì that shows Pope Sixtus appointing Platina as the Vatican librarian. The painting is now displayed in the Pinacoteca of the Vatican Museums. Inventories of the Vatican Library's collection survive from the pontificate of Nicholas V and from that of Sixtus IV. The so-called Codex Vaticanus, perhaps the library's most famous manuscript, has been in the collection since this period. Vaticanus Grecus 1209 dates to the 4th century, and is an especially important witness for the Greek text of the Bible, like the Codex Sinaiticus, most of which is preserved in the British Library. For this reason, the Vatican manuscript is often referred to as Codex B, on account of its role in the critical edition of the Bible, where it was assigned the letter B for the apparatus. The text is written in 3 columns, but still runs to 1,536 pages. It presents a particularly accurate text, for which reason it has been used by scholars of the Dead Sea Scrolls to augment and confirm their studies of those fragments. Of tremendous significance for the history of the Vatican Library is the brief pontificate of Sixtus V, 1585 to 1590. After a more than a century of acquisitions, aided by the so-called Renaissance book hunters who scoured the monasteries of Northern Europe for classical texts unavailable in Rome, the library of Pope Nicholas V had run out of space. Pope Sixtus ordered a new home for the Vatican Library, constructed on the site of a staircase designed by Bramante, which is indicated by a green arrow, across the Cortile del Belvedere from the Apostolic Palace. Sixtus employed the architect Domenico Fontana to build the new library, seen on the left, presenting his plans to the Pope himself. Constructed between 1587 and 1589, when the new Vatican Library opened its doors, it was the largest indoor covered space in Rome that was not used for religious purposes. To the left is a picture of the Vatican Library taken from the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. The library is still located in the palazzo designed by Domenico Fontana. Sixtus V also ordered that the new library be appropriately decorated, and the artists created a quite cogent iconographic program. Along the wall to the right in this photo are depictions of the ecumenical councils of the Christian Church from Nicaea to Trent. Across the room along the left side are the great libraries of history, beginning with Moses giving the law to Aaron and the Levites, the establishment of the Jewish library, and then continuing through Babylon, Athens, Alexandria, Rome, Jerusalem, Caesarea, the Library of the Apostles, and finally the Library of the Popes, which is the Vatican Library itself, the end point of this great tradition. On the center columns are represented the inventors of alphabets. One can say that the right side, that of the councils, represents religion or faith, while the left, that of the libraries, represents culture or reason. These two sides of human nature are brought into harmony and dialogue through the work done in the library. Of the many treasures in the Vatican Library acquired during this period, one might not expect to find a small volume containing several love letters written by Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn. These are written in French, with an Italian translation provided in the back of the book. Since librarians also have a sense of humor, the shelf mark Vaticanus Latinus 3731 contains two volumes, A and B. The first contains the letters. The second is a printed copy of Assertio Septem Sacramentorum Adversus Martinum Lutherum, that is, Henry's defense of the seven sacraments. We have spoken so far of the collections Vaticani Latini, Vaticani Greci in the case of Codex B, and the collection Borghesiano in relation to the papacy at Avignon. Before continuing, it is useful to give a brief overview of the organization of the manuscripts in the Vatican Library as it stands today. The Department of Manuscripts preserves over 80,000 manuscripts, divided into 134 distinct collections. At a macro level, the manuscript collection is divided into two large categories. There are those manuscripts that belong to our open collections, and these are specified by the adjective Vaticani, with the second adjective, for example Latini, Greci, Ebraici, etc., denoting for the most part the alphabet or writing system in which the text in the manuscript is written. By open, we mean that this collection can always be added to. The largest open collection is the Vaticani Latini, with some 15,731 shelf marks. The other large division are the closed collections. These are books that belong to a particular historical collection or library. These are maintained exactly as they were at the time of acquisition. As we turn to the 17th century, the idea of the Vatican Library as a library of libraries comes to the fore. We begin with the Bibliotheca Palatina. The Palatine Library is a collection that existed in the German city of Heidelberg. In fact, it incorporated three collections: the Library of the University of Heidelberg, the Library of the Prince-Electors, and books that belonged to wealthy families in that area. Duke Maximilian of Bavaria conquered Heidelberg during the 30 Years' War and seized its famous library. He then donated the collection to the Pope in 1623. The collection preserves about 2,500 manuscripts divided between Greek and Latin. Among its holdings are books provenant from some of the famous monasteries in that region of Germany, including the Abbey of Lorsch. Here we see two examples from the celebrated Lorsch Evangeliary, a gospel book dating to the 8th and 9th centuries. Only the Gospel of Luke and John are preserved in the Vatican Library from the original codex, and to the left is the monumental illumination that prefaces the Gospel of John. To the right, you can see the ivories that constituted the book's back cover. The 5 plaques that were on the front are now in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. In 1658, Pope Alexander VII arranged for the purchase of the impressive collection of manuscripts once owned by the Duke of Urbino, Federico da Montefeltro. This imposing collection contains some of the finest examples of 15th century bookcraft and artistry. The Duke, an exceptional lover of books, wanted his collection to be extraordinarily beautiful. There are about 900 items, many of the highest quality. To the left, we see an example from the so-called Urbanate Bible. Like many of the books in the Duke's library, it is lavishly decorated. To the right is a page taken from his copy of Dante's Divine Comedy. One of the most dramatic events of the 17th century for the cultural life of Rome was the abdication of Christina as Queen of Sweden, her conversion to Catholicism, and her taking up residence in Rome. Christina was an avid collector of books. Her collection entered the Vatican Library in 1689. Among the around 2,500 manuscripts in Greek and Latin that comprise her collection, a large majority originated in medieval France. Among her collection is a volume of Botticelli's drawings to accompany the text of Dante's Divine Comedy. Here we see his interpretation of Dante's description of the levels of hell, shaped like a cone, from the entrance of Dante and Virgil before they cross the river Styx, to the very bottom level where Lucifer, frozen in ice, perpetually chews Judas Iscariot, Brutus, and Cassius. The Vatican Library has never ceased to acquire books. The political upheavals of the 19th century caused the movement of many volumes across Europe. One particularly noteworthy acquisition occurred during the pontificate of Pius IX at the time of Italian unification. This manuscript is one of 3 in the world that contains text by Thomas Aquinas written in his own hand, his autograph. His handwriting is renowned for its difficulty, earning the title Littera Inintelligibilis. Dating from early in his academic career, the 1250s, it shows the young theologian at work, hastily composing his text during his free moments on whatever scrap of parchment he happened to have to hand. There are errors, inline corrections, and revisions. In the last decades of the 19th century, Pope Leo XIII desired that the Vatican Archive, an independent institution since the early 17th century, and the Vatican Library be even more open to scholars. For this reason, he ordered the construction of a new reading room for the library directly beneath the historic space built by Pope Sixtus V. Leo found precisely the right man to aid him in the pursuit of modernization in the Jesuit Franz Erle. Upon his entry into the Vatican Library, Erle proved an incredibly capable administrator. He was convinced that the real strength of the library was its impressive collection of manuscripts, often referring to it as a library of manuscripts. Consequently, he instituted the project that continues to this day of cataloging the manuscripts according to the highest standards of modern scholarship. He also embraced new methods and new technologies. He was a pioneer in the conservation of manuscripts and their photography, in large measure because of a problem he discovered that is peculiar to the Vatican Library. Angelo Mai was a celebrated scholar, especially of classical literature, in the 19th century. He was a celebrity, really, and zealous in his pursuit of lost classical texts. He realized that some of these texts might be hidden in what are known as palimpsest, or palimpsested manuscripts. These are books the leaves of which once presented an earlier text that has been erased. In some cases, this process happened more than once. If the earlier text was scrapped away with a razor or some other sharp implement, the chances of discovering what was there is nil. But if the parchment was washed, traces of the earlier text remain. Indications of the previous writing can be seen with the naked eye. Employing the best scientific thinking at that time, Mai realized that one could reveal the remainder of the hidden text by applying a solution of gallic acid to the parchment. This solution would react with the metal in the washed-away ink and magically render legible the lost text. This procedure worked well enough, and Mai published new editions of Cicero's Republic, the correspondence of the Roman Rhetor Fronto, and many others to great acclaim. As you might imagine, for the long-term health of the manuscript itself, this was a disaster. In these 2 images, we see the same folio from Cicero's Republic preserved in the palimpsest Vatican Latin 5757, the only known witness to this highly regarded work. When the library digitizes a palimpsest manuscript, regardless of its condition, the photographic laboratory includes 2 images for each page on which there is the presence of erased text, one in natural light and one captured in the ultraviolet spectrum. When Erle discovered the image that May had inflicted upon several manuscripts, he ordered a preservation treatment to stop, or at least limit, the effects of the acid. He had conservationists apply a thin layer of gelatin coating to each affected folio. This was an attempt to seal in the chemical reagent. This treatment at best slowed the process. The manuscripts have continued to deteriorate over time. In so doing, Erle created the first laboratory in the Western world within a library for the express purpose of conserving and maintaining the collection. Now known as our Conservation Workshop, it is a world leader in this effort and works tirelessly to repair and conserve the precious manuscripts and books in our collections, preserving them for future generations. While Erle's creation of the Conservation Workshop was a monumental advance, he created a paradox. The conservator's instinct is to block access to damaged manuscripts to ensure that they will suffer no further harm. These texts, however, are of great interest to scholars and can further our knowledge of the past. To prohibit access to them, while it makes sense from the point of view of the conservator, can hinder the advancement of knowledge and goes against the library's humanistic mandate. Erle struck upon an innovative solution. By the end of the 19th century, photography was increasingly being used for books. Erle believed that it was possible to make photographic facsimiles of manuscripts at 1:1 scale. In the case of damaged palimpsest manuscripts, this would have a double benefit. The manuscript would be readily available to scholars without putting undue stress upon the original. Scholars could have a personal copy in their collection of books, increasing access. The first of these photographic facsimiles of a Vatican manuscript was published in 1906. Erle allowed the photographs to be made only after the gelatin treatment had been applied, meaning that the photographer had to overcome not only the damage resulting from May's actions, but also the sheen that now hovered above the text. The challenge was enormous, and in many cases it is near impossible to read either the overtext or the undertext in the photograph. That said, comparison with modern digital multispectral images enhanced with computer technology has shown that in some cases, those late 19th or early 20th century photographs produce a clearer image than is possible so far today. Erle's introduction of photography to the library in the late 19th century became formalized with the establishment of the library's own photographic laboratory in 1937. In this initiative lies the roots of the library's current project to place digital images of all 80,000 manuscripts in its collection freely available online. In September 1943, the United States Army Air Force attacked the town of Frascati, just outside Rome. The target was the headquarters of Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commander of the Mediterranean Zone. The library of the nearby Bishop Seminary, founded by Cardinal Henry Stuart, Duke of York, in the second half of the 18th century, was completely destroyed. The books themselves, however, miraculously survived. Once volumes began to appear on the antiquarian book market, officials of the Vatican Library took action to save the library from the rubble and transport it to the Vatican. In subsequent months, the Vatican Library became the refuge for other libraries escaping the horrors of war, most notably the Abbey of Monte Cassino. When the war ended, it was decided that the Frascati Library should remain at the Vatican, and the manuscripts were placed among the Vaticani Latini. Vatican Latin manuscript 15,169 is the handwritten catalog for the seminary library. In 1923, during a trip to Italy, King George V visited Frascati and the seminary. At this point, the old catalog became a guest book, and on folio 154 recto appears his signature and that of his consort Mary. Before bringing this presentation to a close, we would like to draw attention to 2 relatively recent acquisitions. The first came into the library in 2007, thanks to a donation by an American businessman, Ralph Hanna, who had purchased a series of papyrus fragments at auction. These fragments constitute one of the oldest surviving witnesses to the text of the New Testament, having been copied sometime during the 3rd century. It originally contained the complete Gospels according to Luke and John, in that order. Today, some 1800 years later, it still preserves about half of each Gospel in a satisfactory condition, including the Lucan version of the Lord's Prayer. For some passages, it is the oldest extant witness, and it is also the oldest manuscript we have in the Vatican Library. Finally, there is the Marega collection. It preserves Japanese documents rediscovered in a storage closet within the Vatican in 2011. The collection was assembled by the Salesian priest Mauro Mantovani from when he was a missionary to Japan from the 1920s to the 1950s. In addition to learning Japanese language and culture as part of his missionary training, Mantovani quite naturally took an interest in the history of Christianity in Japan, which has its origins in the 16th century. One day he happened on a group of boys playing football, but the ball they were using appeared to him to be made of old paper. He asked them where they had found this, and they took him to a cave filled with old documents. From this start, he amassed over 14,000 documents dating from the 17th to the 19th centuries. These are bureaucratic records concerning the prohibition of Christianity in the Ota prefecture. In other words, the documents recount the procedures and investigations used to verify that people living in this part of Japan were no longer Christian. Mantovani sent his collection to the Vatican in the 1950s, where it was in large measure forgotten until recently. There is much more that could be said about the Vatican Library. We have only barely scratched the surface, skipping over the collections of printed books, coins and medals, and graphic designs. This last includes part of the artistic collection belonging to Thomas Ashby. By recounting these aspects, we hope to have given you some sense of the richness of this famous institution that continues to be open to the future. Thank you very kindly for your attention.